Alien 3, ostensibly the concluding chapter of the Alien trilogy, was released on May 22nd, 1992. By then, its production problems were already well known and widely publicized, but of course, this was a tentpole release for 20th Century Fox, so the gears of the hype machine were in full force regardless. That Memorial Day weekend slot was coveted, and perhaps the most important overall aspect of the production. It wasn't the first big film of its kind to have a release date set before even a script was complete, and most certainly wouldn't be the last, but all this time later, Alien 3 remains one of the prime examples of such a practice, and often cited when things go terribly wrong with a production. Maybe not the best legacy to have associated with the film, but perhaps that has changed over the years. Not only has the film been revisited and reevaluated over the years, but the release of the 2003 assembly cut version of Alien 3 gave further insight to David Fincher's original vision. This seemed to elevate how many fans felt about the movie overall. Some would even go as far to say as it's a misunderstood masterpiece, back before saying that about every turkey with production problems was the cool and trendy thing to do. And to be fair, upon its release, it's not like it was a disaster on the scale of something like Heaven's Gate or Ishtar. Its profits paled in comparison to that of the first two Alien films, but it made decent enough money. Enough, at least, that Fox was comfortable and confident enough to make a fourth entry just 5 years later. It wasn't embraced by critics, but not universally panned, either. There were quite a few notable publications that gave the film positive reviews, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Rolling Stone. Definitely nothing to scoff at. When revered and seasoned critics like Vincent Canby and Peter Travers give it a recommendation, people would value those opinions. As internet publications took over and became more and more commonplace, just around the same time as the assembly cut would see the light of day, opinions shaped further, and a new generation gave the movie a shot. Still, when we take all of those years of reviews and put them together, we look at something like Rotten Tomatoes, and we see that it remains viewed as rotten, even if marginally so. Both the critical consensus, based on 61 reviews, and the audience consensus, based on over 250,000 ratings, lands at 46%. So I guess critics and audiences can agree sometimes. You can take Rotten Tomatoes to heart or not, but it's interesting data at least, something to look to. But Alien 3 just remains this almost impenetrable thing. Opinions vary so widely and seem to change every so often as well. I guess I can at least try to put it into a perspective of my own personal experiences with the series, but I have to admit it's pretty biased. I'm sure I've mentioned this before on the channel, but this was the very first Alien movie I ever saw. I remember it all reasonably well. I was 5 or 6 years old, it was the spring or summer of 1993, and Alien 3 had made its way to cable. Also airing on cable at this same time was the unquestionably more appropriate for my age movie Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. If you were a kid in the early 90s, then surely you know the indescribable phenomenon of the Home Alone movies. Of course, when this aired, I'd have to tape it because I was sure to be watching it over and over again, just like with the first movie. And more than likely fast-forwarding to the parts with the traps, because those were obviously the best parts. Back in those days, if you were recording a movie on tape from a cable broadcast, it wouldn't be too unusual of a thing to just keep the VCR on record to pick up a movie that you maybe weren't going to watch right away and save it for later. Depending on the recording mode, you could fit about 3 movies on a tape. It was great. You could then decide to watch those new cable movies anytime you wanted. How about that? But I guess you see where I'm going with this. The movie that came on after Home Alone 2 was Alien 3, and eventually I gave it a look. By that time, I had already seen stuff like RoboCop and Terminator 2 and other scary things worth some parental discretion, but my parents were cool with it and had no problem with me watching it. While I can't conjure up the most specific memories of seeing it for the first time, I can remember pretty clearly that I thought the alien was so cool, and I loved that kind of stuff. A scary, drooling monster that ate people. Absolutely, sign me up. And I remember watching it multiple times, and then discovering the Alien action figures which were around at the time, and then the comics, and I was really curious about the previous 2 movies, but unfortunately never caught them on TV. I actually wouldn't end up seeing the other 2 movies until a few years later. But at that time, Alien 3 was enough for me. I was hooked. So I'll always have that nostalgia for my very first Alien film experience, something I hold dearly. I saw Alien Resurrection when that came to cable 5 years later and was finally inspired to seek out the first 2 and got my hands on those tapes. Official release tapes. No more recording off cable for me. I upgraded. Now able to see the film sequentially and put the pieces together, I think I finally was able to see why viewers of the previous films found it disappointing. Experiencing the grueling terror that Ripley, Hicks, and Newt had to endure, and how effective that movie was in getting you to invest in the characters. All done masterfully, all with a really satisfying ending, so I was kind of dreading going back to Alien 3 again to see these characters killed off. I felt the hurt in my heart. I understood it from others, but I don't think I'll ever have that exact perspective as someone who saw each movie as it was released. Still, I really liked the movie as I revisited it. Something about it just struck a chord with me, and somehow it ended up being the one movie in the series that I'd actually end up rewatching the most. It continues to strike a chord with me. As the years went on, I and many others kept an eye on this David Fincher guy. Ridley Scott and James Cameron were already well established as basically living filmmaking legends, but Alien 3 was David Fincher's very first film. Whether he likes it or not, disowns the movie personally or not, it was the first step in his career as a director. Seven came out in '95, and it was a phenomenon, one of the great '90s thrillers. The Game also deserves mention in that category, though maybe it wasn't the hugest hit and perhaps got lost in the shuffle of '90s Michael Douglas thrillers. But it is an excellent film and often overlooked, so if you haven't seen it, then definitely check it out. Then of course there was Fight Club. That was a revelation that made such a huge impact for those who caught it, quickly becoming a cult hit and today considered a classic. These movies, their quality, and the obvious directorial talent behind them made a lot of viewers go back to Alien 3. Those who recognized its good qualities felt vindicated in a way, that it wasn't some kind of fluke and there was in fact a great director behind the movie, however hindered by the production he may have been. And so more years went on, I remained a huge Alien fan, and I was able to view the movies over again as their presence on home media entertainment evolved. The DVD releases, Blu-ray, and I guess today, streaming. But somewhere along that way, when I was able to marathon these movies more, I came to the conclusion that I think many admirers and non-admirers of the film come to. Within a marathon, even the context of just a trilogy, Alien 3, as the final note, is a downer. It's kind of a buzzkill. The first Alien builds the tension up so masterfully, Aliens pumps up the action and raises the stakes, then Alien 3 plummets you into a pit of despair and desperation. That's, of course, the point. It was intended to make the viewer uncomfortable, to an extent, and certainly succeeds in that. A lot of people like that, and I do too, but when you're watching one right after the other, it's a noticeable shift that, I don't know, just doesn't feel right. But how should we feel anyway? We're not talking about a conventional trilogy here. This is Alien. This is dark stuff, and not necessarily meant to be episodic. For one thing, it's not like the second movie left off on an intentional cliffhanger, such as The Empire Strikes Back or Back to the Future 2, letting everyone know the final chapter would conclude everything. No, not at all, because everything was already concluded with the second movie. Everything you could possibly imagine was resolved, unless the movie gods were somehow able to conjure up an alien egg out of nowhere and crash Ripley's ship. So here we are, like it or not. Alien and Aliens is a great double bill, and maybe Alien 3 is the party pooper, if you want to put it that way, but I think what remains important to me is that each of these movies stands alone quite well. Many have praised James Cameron's film for the fact that you could fairly easily get into it even without having seen the first film. You get an idea of what's happened to this character previously and where the stakes lie moving forward. Alien 3 doesn't get the luxury of such praise, but I think it does the job just the same. I've said I'll never quite understand the perspective of someone going into the film for the first time having been invested in the Hicks and Newt characters and how unfair it seemed to have them killed off, but on the other side of that, I feel I have a unique perspective of being able to go into the film not knowing anything that happened before. There's a mysterious spaceship that crashes on this prison planet, a mysterious woman survives, and she's not alone. There was an alien on board. Then all of the terror unfolds, and the prison's inhabitants come to the realization of what they're dealing with, led by this woman who is unfortunately the closest thing to an expert on this monstrous species, whether she likes it or not. I think that works. I think Alien 3 stands very strongly on its own, and is perhaps best watched that way. With the Alien trilogy, we have 3 different works from 3 different directors, each of whom is incredibly talented, and we get to see them present their vision of what is, in essence, the same story 3 times over, told in 3 distinct ways. There will always be issues with Alien 3, the production nightmare that Fox created saw to that, and even with the assembly cut, it only creates a clearer picture of the full vision, not the vision itself. We could talk about plot holes, continuity issues, underwritten characters, outdated rod puppet effects, and questionable tonal shifts all day, but there are things that are just undeniably great about the movie. I don't think anyone could deny how incredible the art and set decoration is. It's truly some of the best and most ambitious work of its kind to this point. The cinematography is wonderful. There's beautiful, grungy, cyberpunk atmosphere in almost every shot. Elliot Goldenthal's musical score is exceptional and a mood all on its own. The practical effects are just great. There's that moment of Ripley and the alien, which was in every ad, every poster, and became kind of this iconic moment in and of itself. Just look how great the alien looks there. It looks alive. It looks real. I absolutely love the practical effects in the movie. Studio ADI put their unique and expert stamp on the production and continued to give us incredible effects for the next 3 movies. And there's Sigourney Weaver, our long-suffering heroine, the Mother of the Year. She is outstanding in her role here. Every time she came back to Ripley, she brought something completely new and different, completely surprising, and a constant reminder of how much we love this character and this actress. The alien is a huge attraction. Technical aspects and special effects are always a joy to see, but the greatest special effect of the film is Sigourney's performance. She's ultimately the reason why the butts went to the seats in 1992. And if we can credit Fox for nothing else, then it's at least the good sense to recognize that and fight to get her onto the production. Alien is Sigourney Weaver's world, and we're all just living in it. She is superb in this film. For some, these and other elements are enough to overlook the faults of the film and appreciate it on its own terms. For others, I'm sure it remains a monumental misstep, perhaps even going as far to say as this was a failure from which the series would never truly recover. If anything at all has held up, undeniably, about Alien 3, it's the divisiveness it brings with it. But people are still discovering the film, still giving it a chance, or revisiting it to see if opinions have changed, and still discussed passionately to this day. You can't say that of every movie 30 years after the fact, so it's at least something that's captured our interest, for better or worse. But I've shared my opinion, my own reminiscence of Alien 3, and I suppose it's held up pretty well for me. I'd love to hear your opinion, though. What is your Alien 3 story? Do you remember your first time watching it, and how you felt? Did you used to hate it and grow to like it, or the opposite? How does Alien 3 hold up for you 30 years later? Comment below and share your thoughts. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today, and hope to see you for further Alien 3 topics as I continue to celebrate its anniversary. A very special thanks goes out to Brandon James, Grizz4756, Ronni Jensen, and XenoShadowMorph, Queen Tiers of the Patreon Hive. Thank you to Gregory Ford and John Griggs, the Hive's Praetorians. A very special thanks to Lady Anne in the Ellen Ripley Tier of Excellence, and in the role of WEYLAND YUTANI executives, Michael Cole, Nicholas Butta, and Wesley A. Weaver Jr. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for exclusive posts and contests. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow @alien_theory on Twitter and @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.